You want to know why I kept it secret? Look at me when I say this. The marriage wasn't the problem, the hiding was. And I didn't even realize I was suffocating until the truth came out and I could finally breathe again. You think exposure ruins everything. But what if I told you it saved me? What if the thing you're most terrified of people discovering is actually the key to becoming whole? I spent years building this image, this version of myself that seemed untouchable, focused, driven, alone by choice, and the whole time, there was someone standing beside me in the shadows, holding my hand where no one could see. I thought I was protecting us. I thought privacy was the same as safety. But here's what nobody tells you about secrets. They don't just hide the truth from others, they hide you from yourself. When the news broke, I wasn't ready. But maybe nobody ever is. And maybe that's exactly when you discover what's real. It's strange how silence can become a language. For years, I spoke it fluently. Smiles that said, "We're fine." Glances that said, "Stay quiet." Every public moment became choreography, a dance between love and self-preservation. And the world applauded the image I gave them, not realizing it was edited, filtered, cleaned of every trace of something too real. But love doesn't edit. It refuses to be packaged or hidden behind controlled lighting. It spills. It breaks symmetry. It reveals what power tries to cover. At first, I convinced myself it was noble, that being unseen was a gesture of protection. Protect her from the noise, the scrutiny, the opinions that would dissect something sacred. "Let's keep this ours," I said once, and she smiled, believing me, believing that privacy meant peace. But truthfully, I was afraid. Not of losing her, but of what it would mean if people saw the version of me that needed someone. Because needing someone felt like weakness. And weakness didn't fit the brand. Do you know what that feels like? To have love in your hands but act like it's a secret assignment? To kiss in the dark and speak in whispers because the daylight might undo everything you've built? The irony is, I thought secrecy made us stronger. Instead, it made us invisible. To everyone. Sometimes even to each other. Here's what nobody told me. When you don't let people see what you love, you start to doubt its reality. You begin to wonder if it's actually there, if it's real enough to survive transparency. I lived with that question every day, and I told myself I could handle it until the day I couldn't. It happened quietly at first. A rumor, a glance, someone's careless comment seated in a hallway conversation. One day she called me, her voice trembling. "They know," she said. 2 words. Simple. Half relief, half fear. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't expected. Not panic. Not guilt. Freedom. Because the truth, once spoken aloud, has a way of rearranging everything. It's messy, but it's honest. And honesty, for all its discomfort, is clarity dressed as chaos. Wait. Before you scroll, hear this. Transparency doesn't destroy alignment, it restores it. It strips away everything fake until all that's left is what can stand the light. When it all came out, headlines, whispers, judgment. I watched the version of myself I'd built collapse. I saw her name tangled with mine, dissected by strangers, our story born into a world addicted to outrage. And weirdly, I felt peace. Because for the first time, the world wasn't seeing my performance. It was seeing me, flawed, human, finally honest. She didn't speak for days. We barely looked at each other. Not because we were angry, but because we were exposed. There's a specific kind of nakedness that comes when love stops being private. It's not physical, it's psychological. Everyone's eyes become mirrors, reflecting the parts of you you've avoided. And in those reflections, you either break or you grow. I realized then that trust isn't built in the dark. It's tested in daylight. The moments we spent hiding felt safe, but they were just shadows of connection. True partnership can't exist on half-truths. It asks for visibility. It asks for mutual courage. It asks for the strength to say, yes, this is who we are, even when the world frowns. And here's the twist. I discovered I didn't really trust love until exposure forced me to. I had trusted comfort, control, appearances. But trust is different. It starts when control ends. Tell me, when was the last time you trusted someone enough to be fully seen? Not the curated version, your real, unfiltered self. Most people never get there. They think vulnerability means oversharing, when it's actually surrender without the need for applause. That was the lesson. To look at her without the armor. To stop performing intimacy and start living it. The day after the story broke, we walked outside together. Cameras clicked. faces turned. Every instinct in me screamed to pull away, to shield her. But she held my hand tighter, didn't say a word, just looked at me. And in that glance was every unspoken truth. We don't owe them the narrative, we just owe each other the truth. That's when I learned something no book or lecture ever could. Secrets don't protect love, they starve it. Because love grows in light, not in hiding. For years I thought success meant separation, keeping feelings compartmentalized to stay focused. But now, exposed and raw, I saw that love had been my fuel all along. Every plan, every sleepless night building my future, it was her belief that powered it. And yet, I acted like she was a liability to that image of ambition. Sometimes the ego confuses privacy with purpose, but one protects pride, the other protects peace. I had been guarding the wrong one. Have you ever realized that too late? That the wall you built to protect something is the reason it's disappearing? We all do it. We build our barriers, call them boundaries, then wonder why connection feels just out of reach. But truth can't breathe inside walls. It only lives in openness. After the storm faded, we talked. I remember her voice that night, steady, soft, almost too forgiving. She said, "I never asked for the secret. I just wanted to be part of your world, not hidden behind it." That line pierced me, because she was right. I had treated love like a risk factor instead of a foundation. Like something to manage, not something to honor. And isn't that what modern connection has turned into? Strategic affection, conditional commitment, exchange-based emotion. We analyze love like data when all it wants is presence. Here's what shifted for me. I stopped managing perceptions, I started managing honesty. That was harder, but it was real. Now, when I look back, I don't regret the exposure. I regret the delay, the years we spent withholding our own joy because we were afraid of misunderstanding, afraid of losing control. And yet, what is love without surrender? If you're always steering, you're not really with someone, you're just letting them orbit your ego. We learn to rebuild, not in secret this time, but in presence. In the simple, public ordinariness of being seen together, not as headlines, but as humans. Every touch became a rebellion against the persona I once protected. Every shared glance a reminder. Transparency is the highest form of intimacy, because it says, I trust you, and I trust myself. To stand unhidden. But here's where it gets deeper. Exposure didn't just test our relationship, it tested me. It forced me to confront who I am when there's nothing left to hide behind. It's easy to appear strong when everything's controlled, but real strength shows up when control breaks. When the truth, with all its imperfection, becomes your only option. And something beautiful happens there, integrity and identity finally align. You start living as one person, not fragments of roles. The leader, the lover, the friend, the dreamer, all integrated. No masks, no alternate versions, just whole. That was the mirror moment for me. Standing in front of my own reflection and realizing I didn't recognize the man behind all my justifications. I had mastered the art of visibility without intimacy, influence without vulnerability. And now, stripped of illusion, I finally saw someone real. Someone imperfect, but free. Tell me, have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back? That disconnect is the soul's alarm system. It's life whispering, you're pretending again. And the cure is truth. Always truth. But truth costs. It asks you to burn versions of yourself that the world loved. That's terrifying. Yet liberation often starts as loss. Because only when you lose the false peace of secrecy can you gain the real calm of authenticity. I lost followers, opportunities, approval. But I gained depth. I gained her, and I gained myself. That's what exposure taught me, that being seen is dangerous only when you're still pretending. Once you stop pretending, light becomes your ally. So yes, my secret marriage was exposed, and yes, it changed everything. It embarrassed me, tested me, humbled me, but it also healed me. Because the truth that breaks you first builds you stronger after. Now, when I step into rooms, I don't perform, I inhabit. When I speak, I don't convince, I confess. When I love, I don't hide, I stay present. And isn't that what love really wants? Not a perfect performance, but a consistent presence. Some people still whisper, some still question. But the irony is, those whispers no longer define me. Because truth, once faced, loses its power to wound. It becomes the ground you stand on, the mirror you no longer avoid. So here's what I'd tell you now. If you're hiding something that's real, don't wait for exposure to set you free. Choose it. Transparency isn't chaos, it's clarity. The moment you stop hiding, you start healing. And that's when life finally begins to feel like yours again. The hardest part about being exposed isn't the judgment, it's the silence that follows. When the noise fades and the spotlight shifts, you're left standing in the stillness you once feared. That's when you realize exposure doesn't end when the headlines do. It lingers, in glances, in quiet disbelief, in the mirror. That's where the real reckoning begins. At first, I thought I could rebuild my image quickly, control the narrative, tell my side, polish the truth until it gleamed again. That's what everyone does, right? Rewrite the story so it hurts less. But the truth doesn't negotiate. It demands confrontation, not convenience. I kept trying to fix perception, but perception wasn't the wound denial was. Every morning I woke up with her beside me, still half asleep, and for a few seconds I'd forget the world knew. Those moments were pure, untouched. But as soon as I checked my phone, that purity dissolved into commentary, speculation, fragments of opinions I didn't ask for. Everyone suddenly felt entitled to define our love. And for a while, I let them. I gave that power away without realizing it, because when the world questions you loudly enough, you start to echo their doubt quietly inside. Have you ever lived in that echo? It's brutal. The outside noise becomes an inner voice until you can't tell the difference. You begin to wonder if maybe everyone else sees something you don't. If maybe you really did misstep by choosing what felt right. But that's how shame infiltrates the soul, by disguising itself as logic. Wait, before you scroll, hear this. Shame thrives in silence, truth grows through expression. And when you finally speak your truth aloud, the echo breaks. It took me weeks to understand that rebuilding wasn't about reputation. It was about relationship. Not just with her, but with myself. I had to unlearn the idea that strength meant solitude, that independence meant isolation, that protecting what you love meant hiding it. I thought I was shielding her from the world, but maybe I was shielding myself from the fear of being ordinary, of being human. Because beneath ambition, that's the fear, isn't it? That if people see the real us, raw, flawed, emotional, they'll stop believing in our brilliance. But what if real brilliance is exactly that? Rawness without retreat, power with tenderness intact. The exposure stripped away my illusions. And slowly, it exposed something deeper, how disconnected I'd been from intimacy itself. Not from her, but from what intimacy requires, emotional transparency. I had mastered the art of presence without openness, attention without surrender. I gave affection, but not access. I loved, but with conditions. And yet, love without vulnerability is just performance dressed as commitment. We started to talk differently after everything broke. In the past, our conversations were safe. Surface-level check-ins masked as depth. But now, they turned uncomfortable, unfiltered, necessary. She told me she sometimes felt invisible standing next to me. "You were always everywhere," she said, "except when I needed you to be here." That line hit harder than any headline, because it was true. I'd become an idea, a symbol of focus and control, at the expense of being fully present. It's easy to chase a future while abandoning the moment that builds it. So we started again, quietly, with honesty as our starting point, not the reward at the end. Every day became an exercise in showing up without strategy, in listening without fixing, in being seen without shaping perception. The first few weeks were awkward. Vulnerability always is. Wait. Yelly unbehappy. She turtle. The outside noise becomes an inner voice until you can't tell the difference. You begin to wonder if maybe everyone else sees something you don't. If maybe you really did misstep by choosing what felt right. But that's how shame infiltrates the soul, by disguising itself as logic. Wait, before you scroll. Hear this. Shame thrives in silence, truth grows through expression. And when you finally speak your truth aloud, the echo breaks. It took me weeks to understand that rebuilding wasn't about reputation. It was about relationship. Not just with her, but with myself. I had to unlearn the idea that strength meant solitude. It's like learning a new language where every word feels too naked. The strange thing about openness is that once you begin, it becomes addictive. Every shared truth deepens trust. Every honest word dismantles fear. And soon, our connection started to feel less like a secret bond and more like a sacred mirror. One that reflected not what we wanted to be, but what we were. That's what love actually is. A mirror. Not to your perfection, but to your patterns. It reflects every habit, every insecurity you try to disguise. Sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, but always truthfully. And the question is, can you bear to look? Most people avoid mirrors, physical or emotional. They glance, but they don't stare, because mirrors don't flatter, they reveal. In love, we crave recognition but fear reflection. We want to be seen but not fully recognized. Exposure changed that for me. It forced me to face myself, and she became the mirror that wouldn't look away. One night, I told her I was tired of being defined by what I'd hidden. She said, then stop hiding, even from what hurts. And that was the turning point. Because that's when I realized exposure was never the enemy evasion was. The secret had never been our marriage. It was my fear of emotional transparency. Tell me, have you ever pretended you're okay just to keep the peace? Not because you're lying, but because truth feels too expensive? I used to do that constantly. Hold my breath through conflict, hoping avoidance would keep love intact. But silence doesn't protect peace. It poisons it, slowly, invisibly, until nothing real remains. So we started practicing radical honesty. If something hurt, we said it. If something scared us, we shared it. There were fights, of course, words that cut, tears that felt endless. But something profound emerged through that chaos: trust. Real trust. The kind that doesn't come from predictability, but from the courage to face unpredictability together. Here's the part nobody tells you about rebuilding. It's not elegant. It's messy, repetitive, exhausting. But love is a living system. It needs friction to grow, failure to adapt, truth to evolve. Every time we chose honesty over comfort, we expanded the space between us until it could hold the weight of both our truths. I started showing up differently. Not with grand gestures, but with presence. Making coffee instead of promises. Listening more than performing understanding. That's how intimacy is rebuilt. Not through words, but through consistency. Love isn't theory. It's practice repeated daily. And yet, even as we grew closer, I wrestled with guilt. The kind that whispers you don't deserve peace after what you hid. That's the psychology of exposure. It tricks you into believing punishment is the price of truth. But guilt is self-defense dressed as morality. It keeps you trapped in the familiar pain of the past so you never have to risk joy again. It took her softness to teach me grace. She never held my fear against me. Instead, she mirrored it until I saw what it really was. A childlike need to be accepted even when imperfect. She didn't fix me. She reminded me how to be human again. One afternoon, we drove to the coast. No plan, no cameras, no watchful eyes. For the first time in months, we were anonymous again. Ordinary, present, free. The sunlight hit the water like liquid forgiveness. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said quietly, "You don't have to make sense all the time. Just be real." That sentence felt like oxygen. Because that's what love at its highest form gives you. The freedom to exist unedited. But here's what nobody told me. Being real isn't the same as being reckless. Transparency isn't oversharing, it's alignment between your inner and outer world. It's living in a way where your intention and your expression finally match. That alignment became my new compass. Every decision now passed through one filter. Is this real? Exposure taught me integrity wasn't about maintaining appearances, but maintaining congruence. When your public and private selves merge, peace follows. And peace is the quiet confidence of not hiding anything anymore. The irony, though, people respected me more after the truth came out. They saw imperfection and related to it. Turns out, humanity is more inspiring than control. We spend so much energy trying to appear invincible, forgetting that resilience isn't the absence of wounds. It's the willingness to heal in plain sight. And as for love, it changed form. It became gentler, slower, truer. We no longer performed affection. We lived it. We stopped chasing the idea of forever and focused on today, because forever is just today repeated with presence. Every now and then, I still see traces of the old me, guarded, cautious, calculating. But when that instinct rises, I remember the cost. I remember what hiding took from me, the sleepless nights protecting an illusion that no longer deserved protection. Now I choose openness, even when it scares me. Especially when it scares me. Tell me, what would happen if you stopped hiding the thing you're afraid people might not understand? Who would you become if you allowed visibility to replace control? Because the moment you stop performing strength, you start embodying authenticity. And authenticity attracts exactly what's meant for you. We spend so much time trying to earn love through perfection, but love was never meant to be earned. It's meant to be recognized. That's the tragedy of secrecy. It convinces you that you must be flawless to be chosen. But love doesn't choose the flawless, it chooses the genuine. There's a peace that only truth brings. A softness that comes from knowing you have nothing left to conceal. It's not dramatic. It's steady. It's the quiet confidence of alignment. And that's where I live now, in the balance between exposure and acceptance. Because exposure without acceptance is just humiliation. But exposure with acceptance, that's liberation. So yes, everything changed. We changed. I changed. And maybe that's the point of all this. The truth will always shock you before it saves you. Every time I look at her now, I don't see the secret I once guarded.
I see the reflection of who I've become because of it. Someone no longer hiding from his own reflection. Someone who finally understands that love isn't meant to be performed. It's meant to be lived, unhidden, unapologetically present. And that's what freedom tastes like. Unpolished, honest, whole. You don't really understand truth until you've tried to live with it after it detonates your life. Everyone romanticizes honesty until it arrives uninvited and strips you bare. That's what happened. It didn't knock, it didn't ask permission. It came crashing through the illusion I'd built and forced me to see not only what I'd kept hidden, but why I'd hidden it. In those first few weeks after everything came out, the hardest person to face wasn't her, or them, or the crowd. It was me. The man in the mirror. The one who had justified his secrecy in the name of protection, purpose, ambition. I looked into that mirror every morning and wondered, who was I protecting really? Her or my ego? Because ego is clever. It tells you you're being strategic when you're actually being scared. It whispers that privacy is control when really it's isolation. It tells you you're keeping something sacred when you're just keeping it silent. And here's what I started realizing. Love, even the most sacred kind, cannot breathe in denial. Denial is oxygen turned toxic. It numbs while it kills. I had kept my heart underwater for so long that even when truth finally surfaced, I struggled to inhale. I used to believe exposure would destroy everything stable in my life. I was right, it did. But it also destroyed the lies I was attached to.
And that's the part we rarely talk about. How loss can be divine if what it erases isn't meant to stay. Sometimes the breakdown is the breakthrough. But that line only makes sense when you're standing inside the wreckage. In the beginning, she barely spoke to me. Silence was her punishment, but I didn't take it as cruelty. It was her grief speaking in quiet sentences. I could feel it between every breath, the aching space we both created by not knowing how to rebuild something that had already been half true and half hidden. Yet inside that silence, something unfamiliar began to form. Awareness. She was grieving the old image of us, and so was I. The performance was dead, the illusion was gone. All that remained was the stripped-down version of who we really were. Two people without pretense, standing in emotional daylight for the first time. At first, that light blinds you. Then it shows you everything you couldn't see before. Have you ever stepped into such clarity that it scared you? Because clarity kills excuses. It leaves no corner dark enough to defend your lies. For me, it was confronting the truth that all my success, all my composure, all my controlled calm, it had all been designed around one invisible rule: never be fully known. When your entire life is built around that rule, exposure isn't just revelation, it's death. The death of image, the death of distance, the death of the version of you that could hide behind importance. And yet, death has a habit of teaching what comfort never could. Wait, let me tell you what nobody told me before all this. Trust can't exist without risk. Love can't deepen without visibility. And peace? Peace isn't found in safety, it's found in surrender. The day after everything hit the news, I walked through the streets anonymously for the first time, hood up, watching the world from behind tinted glasses. It felt strange, almost poetic, to be invisible again after years of trying to be seen. Every step echoed this quiet truth I hadn't yet dared to say aloud. Freedom isn't being unseen. It's being unafraid of being seen. When I returned home, she was there, standing by the window, quiet. She turned to me and said, "So what do we do now?" Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired. But there was a softness beneath it, like she wanted to believe there was still something left worth saving. And for the first time, I didn't respond with a plan. I responded with presence. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm done hiding." That was the first agreement we ever made out of truth rather than fear. Nothing revolutionary, just human. The kind of sentence that sounds simple but rewires entire patterns. I'm done hiding. It became our ritual, our silent mantra. Every time things got uncomfortable, every time the urge to retreat kicked in, one of us would whisper, "No more hiding." Sometimes while making breakfast, sometimes mid-argument. It became less a promise and more a pulse keeping us aligned. Slowly, life started regaining texture again, real texture, not the polished kind success gives you. The intimacy of shared imperfection replaced the high of public recognition. Our connection deepened, not because things got easier, but because we stopped pretending things were ever supposed to be easy. I began to understand something profound about authenticity. It doesn't guarantee comfort, but it guarantees connection. And in a world addicted to image, genuine connection is a rebellion. Have you ever thought about that? How exhausting performance becomes over time? How it wears down the nervous system to always act composed, always be fine? People don't realize that chronic composure is psychological suffocation. You stop feeling safe inside your own humanity. You become a product of expectation rather than a presence in love. Exposure broke that. It cracked the shell of my controlled persona and forced me to relearn emotional breathing. For the first time, I could admit I was tired. I could admit I'd been terrified of not being admired. I could admit I was scared she might see how fragile I actually was and love me less because of it. But when I finally said it, When I let the sentence fall without performance, her immediate response was not pity, it was relief. Because she'd been scared too. And that's where trust begins. In mutual nakedness. Not physical but emotional transparency. It's two people saying, here's the truth, even if it's ugly, even if it shakes everything. One night, we sat on the balcony long after midnight. The city buzzed below us. She asked, why do you think we kept it secret so long? I thought for a moment, the night breeze brushing against the silence. Then I said, because I didn't trust that we could exist publicly without being consumed. She nodded. And now? Now, I said, I think maybe being seen is what saves us. She smiled. Small, almost sad. Then let's be seen properly this time. That night was a rebirth. Not dramatic, quietly seismic. Because the choice to stop hiding wasn't just about us, it was about stepping into a life governed by truth, not fear. But the mirror doesn't stop reflecting once you look. It keeps showing you what you need to clean. Exposure may start a fire, but growth is the rebuilding. I started therapy. Not for crisis, but for clarity. I wanted to trace the root cause of why I preferred invisible intimacy, why I thought love could only survive in secret. And I found patterns, a childhood hunger for approval, a learned association between achievement and worth. It wasn't secrecy I was addicted to, it was control. The entire architecture of my identity had been built on control. How people saw me, how emotions were expressed, how love was displayed. The exposure shattered that illusion, and what replaced it wasn't chaos. It was honesty. Honest pain, honest love, honest joy. Tell me, are you still trying to control how people see you? Still rewriting your truth to match their comfort? Because control might feel safe, but it's anti-growth. You can't evolve while managing perception. You can't love deeply while monitoring how it looks. That was my revelation. Control feels powerful but kills authenticity. And authenticity is the only language love really understands. The transition wasn't overnight. There were still echoes of the old patterns. Still moments of old fear resurfacing. But each time, the mirror pulled me back. Reminded me that truth is a muscle. It strengthens with use. The more you practice honesty, the easier it becomes to stay aligned. Here's another thing I learned. Exposure doesn't only reveal what's shameful, it also reveals what's sacred. For years, I thought my marriage had been something fragile, dependent on secrecy. But in the aftermath, I discovered it was far stronger than I dared imagine. Love that survives exposure is love that no longer fears reality. It doesn't need perfection, it just needs endurance. And endurance, I realized, isn't about withstanding pain. It's about staying open while in it. That's love in its purest form. It asks for presence during discomfort. It asks for courage when the world watches. It asks for truth when silence might be easier. We started sharing pieces of our story publicly, not as redemption, but as reclamation. Telling it in our own voice became our rebellion against distortion. Not for validation, just for peace. Because storytelling, when born from authenticity, transforms shame into wisdom. And that's what this became for me, a mirror that taught me how to see. The exposure didn't end my love story, it ended my disguise. It made the love itself visible, not the fantasy around it. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be fully visible? Not edited, not performing, not managing perception, just seen. Try it. It'll terrify you. And it'll free you. Because people can only love what they can see. There's something about sitting in truth that quiets every other kind of hunger. You stop craving applause. You stop chasing validation. You stop negotiating your peace for their comfort. You just exist, clean of disguise, full of presence. That's liberation. Sometimes I think about that mirror moment, the man I was before, the one staring back in careful denial. I thank him now, strangely, because he carried me this far. But I don't miss him. The version that needed to hide love to prove strength, that version can rest now. So yes, exposure shocked me. It dismantled everything performative, but it rebuilt me into something real. And that's the shock of truth. It ruins your illusions before revealing your authenticity. Now, when I stand in front of that same mirror each morning, I still ask myself one simple question. Is this real? And when the answer is yes, even quietly, I know I'm finally free. There's a moment in rebuilding where you stop trying to return to what was and start accepting what is. That's the pivot. The place where grief becomes acceptance. It doesn't announce itself. One day you just realize you're no longer fighting the present, you're living in it. And that shift, subtle as it is, changes everything. For weeks after exposure, I kept thinking if I could just reset, rewind, rearrange circumstances, we'd be okay again. I wanted to fix the damage. But damage isn't always meant to be fixed. Sometimes it's meant to be witnessed, honored, then transformed. I had been treating the aftermath like a problem to solve, when it was actually an invitation to evolve. She taught me that. Not through words, but through patience. She stopped expecting me to repair everything, and started asking me to simply be with everything. to sit inside discomfort without reaching for answers. That was foreign to me. My entire life had been built around solutions: identify the issue, strategize, execute, move forward. But love doesn't operate on that logic. Love asks for presence, not productivity. So I learned to sit, to stay, to stop chasing the next version of peace and accept the messy one in front of me. That's where intimacy deepens, not in perfection, but in shared discomfort. When two people can hold chaos together without running, trust begins forming at a cellular level. Have you ever tried that? To just sit with someone in the mess without needing to fix it? It feels counterintuitive. Every instinct screams to act, to move, to change something. But sometimes the most powerful action is stillness. Witnessing without intervention, loving without rescuing. That became our practice. We stopped trying to outrun the fallout and started walking through it, side by side. Some days were heavy, some were quiet, some we barely survived. But we stayed. And staying, choosing each other when leaving, would have been easier. That became the foundation of our shared purpose. Here's what nobody tells you about shared purpose. It's not always about building empires together or chasing aligned dreams. Sometimes it's just choosing to face the same storm without turning away from each other. Sometimes the purpose is simply not giving up. Wait, before you scroll, hear this. Shared purpose isn't something you find. It's something you forge. Through friction, through failure, through the choice to stay when everything tells you to leave. After the exposure, people expected us to fall apart. They waited for the announcement, the separation, that it was too much statement. But instead, something unexpected happened. We grew closer. Not because the pain was gone, but because we stopped hiding from it. We let each other see the worst parts, the scared parts, the parts that had no answers. And in that mutual nakedness, we discovered a strange kind of strength. Shared vulnerability is the glue that performance can never replicate. When two people stop trying to be impressive and start being honest, a deeper bond forms. It's less romantic in the traditional sense, but it's more real. And real always outlasts pretty. I started noticing small shifts. The way she'd reach for my hand without thinking. The way I'd ask about her day and actually listen instead of waiting for my turn to talk. The way we laughed again. Not forced, but genuine. The kind that comes from recognizing absurdity together. These weren't grand gestures, they were quiet reclamations of normalcy. Proof that love could exist beyond the drama. One morning, she made coffee and sat across from me at the table. No phones, no distractions, just two people drinking coffee in silence. And it felt sacred. Not because anything profound was happening, but because we were choosing to be present without needing a reason. That's what partnership becomes when you strip away everything else. Just presence. Consistent, unglamorous, life-sustaining presence. Tell me, when was the last time you sat with someone without an agenda, without needing to prove anything or fix anything? Just existing together in the ordinary? That's intimacy. Not the movie version, the real one. The one that sustains when passion fades and novelty wears off. But presence alone isn't enough. It needs direction. That's where shared purpose comes in. We started asking ourselves, what are we building together? Not what the world expected, but what we wanted to create. And the answer surprised us. We weren't building a brand or an image or a legacy. We were building a life where honesty was the currency and trust was the foundation. That became our North Star. Every decision passed through one filter. Does this honor who we're becoming, or who we used to pretend to be? If it honored the pretense, we let it go. If it honored the truth, we leaned in. That clarity simplified everything. Because when you know what you value, choosing becomes easier. Here's the psychology behind it. Humans crave congruence. When your actions align with your values, peace follows. When they don't, anxiety fills the gap. I had spent years living incongruently, saying I valued love while hiding it, claiming I valued truth while performing a lie. That misalignment was the root of my restlessness. Exposure forced alignment. And alignment, painful as the process was, brought the peace I'd been chasing through achievement. One evening, we walked through the city without destination, just moving. She asked, "Do you think we'd have lasted if none of this happened?" I thought about it. Honest answer? I didn't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But something about the exposure had revealed fractures that were already there, invisible but real. And maybe those fractures needed to surface before they became irreparable. I said slowly, we would have survived, but we wouldn't have thrived. We were coasting on comfort, not building on truth. She nodded. So maybe this saved us. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it just showed us what we always needed to save. That conversation shifted something. It reframed the exposure from tragedy to catalyst, from punishment to invitation. Because truth, when faced with courage, becomes the soil for growth. Avoid it, and you stay stagnant. Embrace it, and you evolve.
We started talking about the future differently, not as escape, but as expansion.
What did we want our partnership to look like 5 years from now? 10? What legacy were we building? Not for the world, but for ourselves. These weren't idle questions. They were the architecture of intentional love. Love that doesn't happen by accident, but by design, by choice, repeated daily. And here's what I learned: love without shared purpose is just companionship. Comfortable, maybe, but not transformative. Real partnership requires vision, a mutual understanding of what you're creating together. Not just surviving together, but building something that reflects both of you. That vision became our anchor. When doubt crept in, and it did, we returned to it. When exhaustion threatened to pull us apart, we remembered why we stayed. Purpose doesn't eliminate pain, but it gives pain meaning. And meaning is the difference between suffering and growth. But here's where it gets deeper. Shared purpose isn't static. It evolves as you do. What we valued in the beginning, privacy, control, safety, no longer served us. So we redefined. Transparency over secrecy, presence over perfection, growth over comfort. These became our new pillars, and every time we aligned with them, our connection strengthened. I started seeing our relationship as a living system, not fixed, but dynamic, constantly adjusting, learning, responding. And like any system, it required maintenance, not in the transactional sense, but in the intentional one. Check-ins, honest conversations, moments of recalibration. These weren't chores, they were investments, small deposits into the foundation of trust. One night, lying in bed, she turned to me and said, "I'm proud of us. Not for surviving, not for withstanding judgment, but for choosing each other when it would have been easier not to." That sentence carried more weight than any public validation ever could, because external approval means nothing if internal integrity is missing. Have you ever felt that? The quiet pride of knowing you did the hard thing, not the celebrated thing, not the easy thing, the right thing. That's what carries you through life's storms, not applause. Self-respect earned through aligned action. We stopped measuring success by how we looked and started measuring it by how we felt. Did we feel whole? Did we feel honest? Did we feel present? Those became the metrics. And they're far more reliable than likes, follows, or public opinion. Here's what exposure ultimately taught me about shared purpose. It's not about having identical goals. It's about supporting each other's becoming. She didn't need to chase my dreams. I didn't need to mirror her passions. We just needed to create space for both to exist without competition. That's partnership. Not merging into one, but thriving as two aligned individuals. The mirror metaphor kept returning. Every conversation became a reflection of who we were, who we wanted to be, and the gap between them. And slowly, that gap closed. Not because we became perfect, but because we became honest. And honesty has a way of collapsing distance. Now, when I think about what we survived, I don't think about the headlines or judgment. I think about the quiet mornings, the honest fights, the tears that healed more than silence ever could. I think about the choice to stay when leaving felt safer. And I realize that's the real story, not the exposure, the rebuilding. Because anyone can love when it's easy, but choosing love when it's hard, that's transformation. So yes, we're still here, not because we're perfect, but because we're committed to truth, to growth, to showing up, even when we don't have it figured out. That's the power of shared purpose. It doesn't require perfection, it just requires presence. And that's what we keep choosing, every single day. There's a quiet season that comes after truth. It's not peace exactly, it's more like stillness with scars. The storm passes, but you can still hear its echo in the walls. People think the healing begins when everything calms down, but that's not true. Healing begins when you start moving again. When you can walk through the ruins of everything that fell apart and say, I can still build here. That's where we found ourselves. In the aftermath. Two souls standing amid the wreckage, no longer hiding, but not yet whole. The exposure had burned away our illusions, but it had also burned away our certainty. We were free. But freedom at first feels like loss. You lose control. You lose predictability. You lose the comfort of pretending. And yet, beneath all that loss, there's a new foundation waiting. A cleaner one, though built through fire. I remember the first morning it felt safe again to smile. It wasn't dramatic. We were just washing dishes together, sunlight dripping through the window. She handed me a mug, and for no reason at all, I laughed. The sound startled me. I'd forgotten what my own laughter sounded like when it wasn't protecting something. She turned and smiled, almost shyly, like she was seeing a piece of me return from exile. That's when I realized Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a series of quiet returns. Have you ever had that moment? That soft realization that the part of you that went missing during the heartbreak is slowly, almost invisibly, coming back? It's like waking up from a long internal winter. You don't even notice the thaw until everything starts to feel alive again. That slow revival became our rhythm. No grand gestures, just presence. No overcompensating love letters or cinematic apologies, just consistent truth. We stopped trying to romanticize recovery and just lived inside it. And the moment we stopped performing healing, genuine restoration began. Because real healing doesn't ask for an audience, it just asks for honesty. Wait, before you scroll, hear this. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about integrating it. Every scar tells you where strength was born. The truth is, we didn't rebuild the same marriage, we built a new one. The old one had been constructed on secrecy and control, on the belief that privacy was the same as safety. But this new version was forged in light, every part of it visible, messy, human. It wasn't flawless, but it was real. There were moments we almost broke again, because even exposure and honesty can't instantly cure deeply ingrained patterns. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits once kept you safe. I still flinched at vulnerability, still hesitated before admitting fear. And she still guarded her heart, half expecting me to disappear when things got inconvenient. But the difference this time was, we talked about it. We didn't let silence do our talking anymore. That's what saves a relationship after exposure. Not forgiveness, not passion, but communication. Silent love dies quietly.
Vocal love survives because it doesn't guess, it asks, it listens, it adjusts. And that's what we started doing, turning our fears into conversation, not conflict. I remember one night, lying awake, and I asked her, "Do you still resent me for keeping it secret?" She didn't answer right away, just sighed, long and deep. Then she said something that still echoes through me. "I think you confuse protection with possession. You weren't trying to protect me. You were afraid to lose me." And she was right. I had cloaked fear in the costume of care. That's the shadow side of love, the illusion that control equals safety. But control is only love wearing armor. It might look strong, but it can't breathe. That conversation was a mirror moment. Mirrors always show you what intention hides. I realized then that love, at its core, is risk. To love is to give someone the power to hurt you and trust that they won't. I had avoided that risk for years, believing I was guarding something sacred. But sacredness doesn't need secrecy. It needs sincerity. So, I started practicing radical openness. No filters, no strategic omissions. If something hurt, I said it. If something scared me, I admitted it. Transparency became my new discipline. And slowly, something inside me softened. I stopped walking like a fortress and started breathing like a man who no longer needed walls. She noticed it too. One morning, she looked at me and said, "You feel calmer." Not because the world was calmer, but because I stopped fighting the truth. It's strange how much energy we waste resisting reality. Once you stop, peace arrives almost instantly, like a guest who'd been waiting for permission to enter. Tell me, when was the last time you told the full truth? Not just to someone, but to yourself. It's terrifying at first. You feel exposed and raw. But then comes the freedom, because nothing owns you anymore. Lies are heavy. Secrets are suffocating. But truth, it's light. It may burn, but it also breathes. Freedom became our new language. Not freedom from each other, but freedom inside each other. Emotional independence within intimacy. It's a paradox most people never explore. They think love means fusion. But healthy love is orbit, not merger. Two distinct gravities, circling a shared center of meaning. Too close, and you lose identity. Too far, and you lose connection. The art is in the balance. The space between us wasn't absence anymore, it was oxygen. The exposure forced me to learn that balance. Before, I thought closeness meant control. I thought love meant possession. But real love doesn't bind. It includes. It says, "I choose you, not because you complete me, but because you remind me I'm already whole." That's emotional maturity. The ability to love without ownership, to stay without suffocating. Most relationships collapse not from lack of love, but from lack of space. People try to merge souls when they should be building bridges. Love doesn't dissolve the self, it elevates it. And only transparency can create that elevation. She and I started designing our lives differently. Fewer masks, fewer obligations, more presence in ordinary things. Cooking instead of dining out, long walks instead of lavish escapes. We started finding beauty in the mundane, because truth makes the ordinary enough. When you stop performing, you start appreciating. And it wasn't all joy. Growth never is. There were nights the pain revisited us like an old guest, shame still echoing in a corner of my mind, the fear of relapse, of becoming that guarded version of myself again. But with every wave, we responded with grace instead of panic. That's progress. Not the complete absence of old wounds, but the awareness to meet them differently. Wait, before you drift off, listen. Progress doesn't mean I never fall again. It means I know how to rise differently this time. That became our rhythm. Falling and rising, honestly. No pretending the journey was neat. Healing is nonlinear. Some days you move forward. Some days you revisit old pain. But the key is, you return to truth every time. That's what keeps growth sustainable. We made an agreement one night over dinner, never to weaponize the past. The exposure had already done enough damage. There was no need to turn memory into ammunition. Instead, we turned it into instruction. What once triggered us became reference points for wisdom. That's how transformation happens. Not by erasing pain, but by repurposing it. Tell me, have you repurposed your pain yet? Or are you still serving it the same way it first appeared? Pain is energy. It demands direction. Unused, it becomes bitterness. Transformed, it becomes purpose. We chose transformation. We decided that the story of our exposure wasn't going to be a symbol of shame, but a gateway to depth. That's when things shifted from healing to meaning. The deeper I reflected, the more I realized our secret wasn't an isolated event. It was a mirror of how I approached life. Hiding became a habit, not just in marriage, but in leadership, friendships, even self-reflection. Exposure didn't just reveal a relationship, it revealed a mindset. One that valued perception over authenticity, achievement over alignment, success over self-connection. That's what finally broke me open. The mirror, once brutal, became sacred. I began to see exposure not as destruction, but as revelation. Every crack it caused revealed where light wanted to enter. And light, once it enters, doesn't leave. So now, when I look back at the chaos, I don't see humiliation. I see initiation. The dismantling of illusion was my invitation to evolve. It forced me into integrity. Not performative integrity, but embodied alignment. The kind that doesn't need approval, because it's rooted in truth. People often ask me if I wish it had never happened. And the honest answer, no. Because without exposure, I would have kept pretending peace was the same as silence. I would have kept mistaking control for love. And I would have never known what real connection feels like. Sometimes, you have to lose your image to find your identity. That's what happened. I lost so much, but I found alignment. I found presence. I found her, again, not as my possession, but as my mirror. And most importantly, I found myself, finally unfiltered. Here's what I know now. Transparency isn't the end of power, it's the beginning of it. Vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength, it's its purest form. Exposure doesn't destroy love, it distills it into truth.
Everything that remains after truth is exactly what's meant to. So, we keep living. Imperfectly. Presently. Truthfully. Our life now is simpler, but it's real. No secrets, no pretense, just two people who lived through a storm and learned how to stand in the light without flinching. That's freedom. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to stay visible while afraid. And that courage, once you taste it, you never want to live without it again. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes only after loss, the kind that feels less like understanding and more like remembering. You don't gain something new, you just stop lying to yourself about what was always there. That's where I found myself, one quiet morning, sitting alone on the balcony, watching the city move like nothing had ever happened. And for the first time, I didn't want to move with it. Stillness had become my new teacher. Exposure had forced me into a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of questions that wouldn't stop echoing. Who am I when no one's watching?